This is a set of 3 videos describing the history of the Hope Valley Spar business, set up by my grandfather Walter Hillage in 1921, and describes what happened to much of the profits. Part 1 is an introduction and explains why the business was started in the first place. This photo, taken in Hope Valley about 1890, was provided by the Shropshire Caving and Mining Club, and shows a 3-level bridge across which lead ore from the East Roman Gravels mine was taken to an area where it was dressed and the waste piled up as what was known as the hillocks. It was from this waste that the spar was reclaimed. To give a proper understanding, I need to explain the arrival of the Hillages in Hope Valley. In the 1700s and 1800s, the Hillages were living in Buttington, Montgomeryshire, just over the Welsh border. I say Hillages, but at that time the name was phonetic, and if written down could be spelt Hillage with an A, Hillage with an I, Hillage with a D, Hilditch, Hilditch, Elage with an I, Elage with an A, etc., etc. In fact, within the same document, more than one version of the spelling can often be found. The name Hilditch with a D still exists in Buttington. The Hilditches at one time owned the brick factory. When it was closed, the area became Border Stone, but still under Hilditch ownership. In 1864, a James G. Hillage left Buttington to go to fight in the American Civil War, but perhaps luckily for him arrived too late. He decided to stay, and several others of the family followed him. They settled in Oneida County, New York. In about the year 2000, George Peake, a descendant of James, contacted one of my Hillage cousins, and she passed him on to me. My name is Peter Prest, but my mother was Lily Hillage, a daughter of Walter Hillage, who started the Spar business. This is a photo of Walter. My wife Rosalind and I set about helping George. To his amazement, using some of his information, we were able to send him copies of the tithe maps showing his ancestors' Hillage properties and photos of properties connected with his family that still exist, of which this is an example. During this research, we discovered that Walter, my grandfather, who started the Hope Valley Spar business, was a descendant from the same route. So on to the Spar business and the Hope Valley Hillages. Edward Hillage, 1808 to 1879, left Buttington and moved to Red Hill. There he met an Eleanor Major, spelt with a G, but also sometimes spelt with a J, who came from Penturvin, which can be seen near the top left of this map, underlined in red. They married in 1933 in Meal Brace, but then moved to Hemford at the top of the Hope Valley, where they lived in the small cottage shown in this tithe map. The modern map of the same area shows the preserved field lines. Edward worked at one of the lead mines, but as was common then, also farmed a few fields adjacent to the house. The cottage no longer exists, but a similar cottage on the other side of the road is still lived in. However, the disturbance of the ground left by his cottage can still be picked out on Google Earth. They had 3 children: Edward, who died a few days later, Mary, 1834 to 1854, and Thomas, 1837 to 1887, who married Mary Jones in 1866. Thomas rented Field House, which was opposite Roman Gravels, part the way up the hill. He worked in the lead mines and had 11 children, of which my grandfather Walter was the last. Walter started at the bog mine, but then decided to train as a GWR engine driver in Wellington. The apprentices started at the bottom, cleaning the locomotives. Unfortunately, he suffered a dreadful accident. The GWR accident report read 7th of January 1904, Wellington Salop. Name of person injured, Walter Hillage, aged 18. Hand run over and all fingers since amputated. It was Hillage's duty to assist the shedman, T. Walker, to take a tank engine from the coaling stage to the engine shed, number 2 road, into the ash pit of which it was intended to remove the fire. But before that could be done, it was necessary to remove a wagon, which was standing immediately inside the shed on number 1 road. After Hillage had attached the engine to the wagon, Walker noticed that owing to the entrance being blocked, it was not then possible to take the engine and wagon from the siding, and consequently, to avoid delay, Walker, who had stopped the engine over the outside pit, called to Hillage, "We'll have the fire out here." Hearing this, Hillage at once got into the ash pit to lift the grid preparatory to removing the fire bars. But while he was doing so, Walker, who had noticed that the engine was not standing directly opposite the water hydrant, moved the engine, which was then bunker in front ahead. This caused Hillage, then engaged at the rear of the ashpan, to fall on the side of the pit, with the result that his right hand got on the rail and his fingers were run over and had to be amputated. This photo shows the conclusion. The conclusion stated, "In this case I can only conclude that Walker was responsible for the accident, as having told Hillage that the fire was to be removed at that point, he should not have moved the engine again without knowing it was safe for him to do so." It was a terrible situation to have at age 18 lost all the fingers on his right hand. However, in later years he said at least it saved him from being killed in the First World War. Walter did receive some compensation, which he used to buy Field House, which until then he'd been renting. There were not many job openings for a man with only a thumb on his right hand. One of the things he took on was as an insurance agent. However, he soon gave that up as he felt he was cheating people. Eventually he got taken on again at one of the mines. As far as I can discover, it was the bog. In 1912 he married his sweetheart Lily Morris. This was against the wishes of her parents, since they considered the man with effectively one hand was not much of a catch. Lily had been born in Bent Launt, in a house called the Hollies. However, when the rent was put up, the family moved to a house called Pleasant View. This was an attractive house, but in an exposed position, and according to my Auntie May, she wouldn't let me call her May, before the days of central heating and double glazing, cold and damp. This didn't suit Lily's mother, born as Mary Jane Corbett. Mary suffered from asthma, and her family thought it was the house that eventually killed her. Her husband, George Morris, soon remarried, rather too soon for the Hillage family. Auntie May knew both houses and much preferred the Hollies. Lily started school in Bromlow, so during the week she lived with her grandmother in a large black and white house just round the corner from the school, only going back to Pleasant View at the weekends. During our researches, we talked to the then owners of the black and white house. They said that when they bought it, there were no deeds. They had the timbers examined by an expert, and he reported they'd been recycled for an old warship which was common at the time. Walter and Lily continued to live in Field House, and their 5 children, May, Phyllis, known as Phil, Walter Thomas, known as Tom, Raymond, known as Ray, and Lily were born there. Field House became too small, so Walter decided to extend it. The house was built of stone, but the builder that Walter trusted only built in brick, so brick it was. You can see the brick extension of the original stone house at the left side of the picture. In later years, long after they left, the house was significantly changed. This photo was taken in about 1980, when my mother stayed there as a holiday let. Walter and Lily scrimped and saved. Walter, with his one good hand, even mended all the shoes. Eventually, in 1927, they got enough money together to buy Bank Farm on the other side of the valley, which had about 70 acres. This map shows Bank Farm underlined in blue. The bog mine was going through a bad time, and once the foreman learnt about the purchase of Bank Farm, Walter was laid off. They were not due to gain possession of Bank Farm for several months, so they were left with no income. Mary Lindley who to annoyance was known as Polly, was one of Lily's sisters. She had a small shop in her house and helped them out with some supplies. The house is in the centre of Hope, opposite the turn to Bromlow. This is the end of part 1. Part 2 starts with an amazing coincidence and goes on to describe the beginnings of the Spar business, which at its peak employed 20 men.